He used my own phone to drain my bank account, and then gaslighted me for noticing. I knew something was off the moment I saw a $200 charge I didn't make. It wasn't just the money, it was the timing, the precision, like someone had been watching me, tracking me. And when I brought it up to him, the man I married, the man I shared a bed with, he laughed. That slow, smug kind of laugh that makes your stomach twist before your mind catches up. He said, "Maybe you're just not good with numbers." I stared at him, blank, silent. I'd spent years budgeting every cent, rebuilding my credit after my dad left us with debt. I handled every bill, every transfer, every password. But now, I was apparently too emotional to notice where my money went. His words cut deeper than the theft. He didn't even try to deny it. He made me question my own sanity for thinking it was suspicious. I didn't sleep that night, not even a minute. I kept replaying everything. The times he'd asked to borrow my phone because his was charging. The way he suddenly guessed I'd booked that girl's trip. The time I typed my password and he stood behind me, saying nothing. Every moment felt poisoned, like he'd been studying me like a project, not a partner. But the real moment, I knew, when I confronted him again the next day, calm, precise. I listed the charges, the logins, the alerts. I said, "Tell me how you knew about that Amazon package before I told you." His face froze for 1 second, then he smiled. Not embarrassed, not scared, just entertained. He said, "Wow, babe, you're really spiraling, huh?" That's when I checked the privacy settings on my phone, buried under permissions I'd never touched. A remote access app I didn't install, last opened 3 hours ago. I felt my blood go cold. It had his email on it, his full name, not even hidden. He didn't expect me to look, or maybe he didn't care if I found out, because by then, he already felt in control. I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt something worse. Humiliation. I'd defended him to my friends when they said he gave them a weird vibe. I'd told my mom to back off when she said he was too interested in my money. I told everyone he wasn't like my exes, that he was solid, safe. That was the biggest lie I told myself. He used my own routines against me. He learned when I'd be asleep, when I'd be distracted, when I was vulnerable. He didn't just steal my money, he hijacked my trust. And the scariest part? He did it while kissing me goodnight and saying, "I love you." The spyware was just the surface. What he really installed was a whole other kind of control, one I didn't see coming, one I'd spent years trying to convince myself couldn't happen to someone like me. I was wrong. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I had my own graphic design business, worked from home, paid off my student loans, and managed to buy a small condo before I turned 30. That place was my sanctuary. Every plant, every shelf, every tiny kitchen upgrade had my fingerprint on it. It took me years to feel safe in my own space. Years to trust that I could stand on my own. I met Jake at a conference in Austin. He was charming, soft-spoken, the kind of man who listens, or at least pretends to. We talked about art, music, how we both hated small talk and loved road trips, with no destination. He wasn't flashy, but he made me laugh in quiet ways. Thoughtful texts, random playlists. That one time he brought me coffee during a deadline crunch without being asked. In the beginning, he felt like calm. Not excitement, not fireworks, just calm. And after a string of emotionally unavailable guys who only called me when they needed a break from chaos, Jake felt like a break from survival mode. He moved in after a year. We got married the year after that. No big wedding, just courthouse vows and a dinner with close friends. I thought that was romantic. Simple, real. Everyone told me I was lucky. "He's grounded," my cousin said. "You finally found someone normal," my best friend whispered. Even my mom, who never trusted anyone, gave him her quiet blessing. "He's not like the others," she told me one day, folding my laundry. I nodded, holding on to that sentence like a life raft. We shared everything, or at least I thought we did. Joint accounts, shared calendars, grocery runs, the occasional lazy Sunday binge-watching cooking shows. We split rent, utilities, and agreed that any freelance bonuses or big client checks would go into savings for a future house. He was never extravagant, never demanding. He made me feel like we were building something together. But now, looking back, there were tiny cracks. Like how he always insisted on being the one to handle the groceries, even when I offered, or how he never logged into our joint bank app when I was around, even though I showed him how 3 times. Or how he asked me, half joking, if I'd ever consider putting the condo in both our names, just in case. I brushed it off. I told myself he was just being responsible, that I was overanalyzing, that past trauma was making me paranoid. Because Jake wasn't loud or angry or careless. He was soft. He smiled often. He cooked dinner. He rubbed my shoulders when I was stressed. So how could I possibly believe he was capable of betrayal? I guess that's the danger of calm. It makes you stop questioning. It makes you ignore the feeling in your gut that says, something isn't right. I ignored it for months, maybe longer, because I wanted it to be true. I wanted him to be different. And that want cost me more than money. It cost me clarity. It started small, almost invisible, like how he'd casually ask, ask, "Hey, did you order something today?" with a fake laugh tone, even though I hadn't mentioned anything. Or how he'd say, "Your client paid you today, right? I saw your mood change," like it was a joke, like he was reading me too well. At first, I thought it was just intuition, or maybe he was just paying attention. Then came the forgotten passwords, apps logging me out randomly, notifications that disappeared before I could read them. One morning, I woke up and saw a failed login attempt from a city we'd never been to. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I was overthinking. That's what Jake would say anyway. I started feeling like I was living inside a fog. My routines felt watched. He always seemed to know things before I told him. What groceries I needed, which friend I was texting, when I was planning to visit my mom. He'd say, "I just know you," but it didn't feel romantic anymore. It felt invasive. Then the tension shifted to my money. He'd make comments like, "You sure you need another plant?" Or, "Wow, $80 on skincare?" I began second-guessing every small purchase. Every swipe of my card felt like a test I was failing, but he wasn't yelling. He wasn't controlling in the obvious ways. He just dropped comments like stones in my stomach. The worst part? He started gaslighting me so subtly it felt like I was going crazy. One night, I told him I noticed a $300 Venmo charge I didn't recognize. He smiled and said, "You probably just forgot. You're always so busy." And when I said I was sure I didn't send it, he laughed and said, "You must have clicked something by accident. You do that a lot." I stopped checking my accounts daily. It made me feel paranoid, obsessed. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted me tired, distracted, doubting myself. The emotional abuse wasn't loud. It was quiet and consistent, like a drip, like erosion, slowly wearing down my confidence, one moment at a time. My friends started noticing. "You've been off lately," they'd say. Or, "Are you okay? You don't sound like yourself." I lied. I said work was stressful. I said I was tired, but deep down, I was scared. Not of him physically, but of the version of me I was, becoming around him. Smaller, numb, uncertain. And then there was that time I mentioned going back to therapy. Just a passing comment at dinner. He didn't even look up from his plate. He just said, "For what? You're not depressed." That silence that followed was louder than any argument we ever had. I chewed in silence, my appetite gone. That night, I didn't sleep again. I stared at the ceiling and realized I was living with someone who thought control was love, who thought silence meant surrender, and I was slowly disappearing under the weight of his manipulation, but not for long. The moment it all snapped wasn't loud. It didn't come with screaming or doors slamming. It came with a silence so sharp it felt like glass under my skin. I was sitting on the floor of the living room, sorting receipts for tax season, something I'd done every year since I started freelancing. I noticed something strange. 2 charges to the same vendor, 5 minutes apart, one for $47.99, the other for $1,800. My hands went cold. I checked the timestamp. I was in a Zoom meeting when it happened. I hadn't touched my phone. I hadn't authorized anything. My breathing got shallow. I checked the card statement. Another 3 charges I didn't recognize, all made over the past week. They weren't massive, just small enough to hide, but they added up to almost $3,000. I went to Jake. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just held out the paper and asked, "Did you use my card?" He looked at it, blinked, then shrugged. "No idea. Maybe you saved it on something." I asked again. He didn't even flinch, just kept scrolling on his phone like I was the one being dramatic. So I said, "Then how do you explain this app on my phone?" I'd found it 2 days earlier, but waited to confront him. It was disguised as a weather app, but under the hood, it had access to my location, my texts, my call logs, my screen. I held it up to him. He smiled. "You really think I'd do that?" That's when it broke. Not my voice, not yet, but my body. My hands shook, my throat tightened. Tears didn't fall, they threatened. He stood, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a drink and said, "You always think someone's out to get you. That's why people leave you." That sentence, that fucking sentence. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was weaponizing every insecurity I'd ever shared. The abandonment issues, the trauma, the therapy sessions I'd cried through. He was turning my vulnerability into ammunition. And for what? Control? Money? Power? I stood there, unable to breathe. I whispered, "I trusted you." He turned, cold eyes locked on mine, and said, "Yeah, that was your first mistake." That was it. That was the moment I knew I was done. Not broken, not defeated, just done. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked past him, phone in hand, and locked myself in the bathroom. I backed up every file, took screenshots of every transaction, emailed it all to a private account. Then I called my bank, froze everything, and set up 2-factor authentication on every account. From behind the door, I heard him knock, softly. "Babe, you're overreacting. Come on. Don't do this." But I didn't answer. I was already gone, even if my body was still in the apartment. My trust had been murdered in real time, and nothing he said could resurrect it. That night, I slept with my phone under my pillow, and the next morning, I started planning my exit. I didn't tell him I was leaving. I didn't give him the performance he expected. No tears, no shouting, no dramatic suitcase moment, just silence, cold, clean silence. It was the only thing I had left that still felt like power. I spent the next week pretending to be tired, distracted, just stressed with work, I told him. I smiled when he handed me coffee. I kissed him goodnight. I nodded at his empty apologies, all while I moved money, packed essentials, and found a lawyer who knew exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. I rented a storage unit under a different name. Every morning, I took a small bag out with me, for the gym, I said, and slowly moved my life out of that apartment, piece by piece. My laptop, my passport, sentimental things he could never replace if he tried to use them as leverage. He didn't notice, or maybe he did and thought I was too weak to act. That was always his mistake, underestimating me. He thought because I was quiet, I was scared. Because I was soft, I was submissive. He thought I'd never walk away without making a scene. He was wrong. The day I left, I didn't even wait for him to get home. I left the keys on the counter, along with a manila envelope of printed screenshots, the spyware, the charges, the proof. No note, no explanation, just truth. I didn't block him. I didn't text him. I didn't even check to see if he'd tried to call. I let him sit in the silence, in the empty space he created, in the absence of the woman who had once loved him, deeply and foolishly. My mom picked me up that night. She didn't say much, just held my hand in the passenger seat and played the radio softly. I stared out the window, numb but free. I was floating in the kind of grief that doesn't cry, it just breathes. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood room. Same ceiling, same window, but I wasn't the same girl. I was 31, with a hard-earned life ripped out from under me. And yet, for the first time in months, I wasn't scared. I was exhausted, but clear. He texted 3 days later, "We need to talk." I didn't reply. Then, "You're making this worse." Silence. Then, "I miss you." Blocked. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done performing for someone who saw me as a resource instead of a person. Someone who thought love meant access. Someone who mistook control for closeness. I chose peace, not the easy kind. The kind you earn by burning your own illusions to the ground. Starting over felt like trying to breathe underwater. Every task, every conversation, every decision came with weight, but I did it, slowly, quietly, day by day. The first thing I did was change my number, not just to cut him off, but to cut off that constant, invisible thread of dread that came every time my phone buzzed. I opened a new bank account. I paid for a credit monitoring service. I called every company I'd ever given access to and reset everything. Then, I started therapy. Again, weekly sessions at 7 p.m. every Thursday. At first, all I did was cry, not because I missed him, but because I hated myself for letting it go so far. My therapist said something I still replay sometimes. He didn't fool you because you're weak. He fooled you because you're good. That sentence held me up for weeks. I moved into a tiny studio with exposed brick and a broken heater. It was drafty and too expensive for what it was, but it was mine. I worked from the kitchen table, made soup in one pot, kept lavender by the window. I didn't decorate much. I needed space to think, to feel. My business took a hit. Losing focus meant losing clients. But I showed up, redesigned my website, took smaller gigs, stayed up late sending pitches no one answered. And then, slowly, they did. A brand deal, a referral, a speaking gig. Not miracles, but movement. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not just missing someone, but missing the version of myself that believed in someone. I had to rebuild trust in my own instincts, to stop flinching at kindness, to believe that not everyone wanted something from me. One night, a client-turned-friend invited me to a rooftop dinner. I almost said no, but I went. I wore lipstick for the first time in months. I laughed too loud. I told the story of the weather app like a joke, even though my hands trembled holding the wine glass. And everyone listened, not with pity, but with respect. That was the night I felt it. Pride. Not in surviving, but in refusing to stay stuck. I wasn't thriving yet, but I wasn't drowning either. I was learning how to breathe again. The next month, I launched a mini course on digital privacy for creatives. It didn't go viral, but the messages I got, women thanking me, sharing their stories, asking how to track hidden apps, I felt useful again, like maybe my pain had a purpose. I didn't chase closure. I stopped needing it. I didn't need an apology to heal. I just needed my own permission to move forward, and eventually I gave it to myself. I didn't just rebuild, I redesigned. It happened almost a year later. I was at a small local conference for women in tech and design, speaking on a panel about digital boundaries. I was mid-sentence, talking about how privacy is an act of self-respect, when I saw him, Jake, standing near the back of the room, arms crossed, pretending to listen like he belonged there. For a second, my heart stuttered, not out of fear, out of sheer disbelief. He looked thinner, paler, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He wore the same gray jacket he always said made him feel sharp, but it hung on him like it didn't quite fit anymore. He didn't approach me after. He lingered, watched, maybe waiting for a moment alone, maybe hoping I'd react. I didn't. I just gathered my things slowly, smiled at the women around me, and walked right past him. Eyes forward, shoulders square, no flinch, no recognition, but I felt him turn, follow me out with his eyes, like he didn't expect that version of me, the one who didn't look back, who didn't give him the power of a reaction. A week later, he tried again, this time through a mutual friend who messaged me on Instagram. Jake asked about you, said he saw you speak. He seemed regretful. I didn't reply. I didn't owe curiosity to anyone who once erased me so easily, but I did look at his profile, just once. Private, blank bio, fewer photos than I remembered. The last post was an old picture of us, still up. The caption said something like, "Some losses teach you everything." I laughed. Quiet, cold, too late. A month after that, I ran into his sister at a coffee shop. She looked surprised, said I looked radiant, said Jake had been through a lot. I just nodded, smiled politely, and told her I hoped he found peace. Her face dropped. She looked like she wanted me to say more, to ask something. I didn't. That was my closure. Seeing him see me, thriving, unbothered, completely unreachable, was the only confrontation I needed. He had watched me fall apart, assuming I'd never stand back up. And now here I was, speaking to rooms, full of women, being everything he tried to keep small. He underestimated me, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Sometimes I think about how quiet it all ended. No courtroom drama, no apology letter, no grand revenge, just distance, just absence, just the sound of my own footsteps walking away from a life that almost erased me. I used to believe love meant transparency, sharing everything, giving access, holding nothing back. But now I know love without respect is just possession, and possession dressed up as care is the most dangerous kind of control. He didn't just steal my money, he stole time, sleep, confidence. He weaponized the softness I once wore with pride and tried to turn it into shame. But the thing about soft people is, we don't break, we bend, we bruise, but we don't disappear. I rebuilt every part of my life from the ground up. And in the process, I found parts of myself I didn't even know existed. Strength that doesn't roar, power that doesn't beg to be seen, boundaries that don't shake when someone knocks on them. People still ask me how I knew, how I figured it out. The truth is, I always knew. My body knew. My gut screamed. I just didn't want it to be true, because I loved him. But love that costs your voice, your peace, your bank account, and your autonomy? That's not love, that's theft. So no, I don't miss him. I miss who I thought he was. But even that version, the kind one, the gentle one, was just a mask, a placeholder for control. I don't wish him pain. I don't wish him anything. Because now, when I open my phone, I don't feel watched. When I spend my money, I don't feel guilty. When I speak, I don't second guess my own truth. I'm not hiding anymore. He didn't break me. He revealed me.